And welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. Now, I am covering the Sovereignty update and I am covering particularly Capsuleer and Corp Citadels. Now, the reason for this is I want to actually compare the two and then I want to give their pros and cons. Now, no, actually, I don't want to compare the two. I want to discuss the two, the restrictions put on the stations, and how they affect the game in terms of pros and cons. Now, one thing to note, as everybody does know, I am severely harsh on NetEase, and that is for several reasons. NetEase is a big company. Eve Echoes is a premium class game, and considering that it is a predominant gaming company and a premium game and a high end game with a high concentration capability, I rate them as follows. Under a million in terms of player base, I will rate them as an E class game. In other words, they are a failure of a game. They failed their potential. Right, so if they have less than a million, they E class as far as I'm concerned. Their Google rating, if it is under 4, they are an E class game in the terms of the overall audience. So E class on both sides. The last one is appeasing the audience, appeasing the player base. If they implement updates to help their audience, I give them a little bit better of a rating. However, I rate NetEase's approach on this premium game as E class. So in other words, I give NetEase a total E for a premium game, which means that they failed to capture audience, they failed to create content, they failed to appease audiences, and overall the game is a massive fail. Now I can explain why it happened, but this is for Sovereignty and I will go through with everything that comes in pros and cons. And remember, I am going to be very harsh against NetEase with this. So, with the Corp and Capsuleer outposts came restrictions recently. There are 5 restrictions altogether. I can't list them all 100%, but I am going to just list off whatever I do remember. Number 1, the first restriction is 2 stations cannot be within 5,000 kilometers of each other. Number 2, you cannot own more than one Capsuleer outpost. Now, I didn't know that this was a rule till recently when developing a video for them, and I was told that the restriction is 1 per player. So yes, that was really infuriating. The next was no collidable objects. So you can't place a citadel within any of the planetary bodies to get the advantage of them not being able to visually track your station, to give you the advantage of having your enemy move blind. Right? The next one of that entire situation was you have to deploy stations within 3 AU of a planetary body. Now, that was obviously not so bad originally, but with their 5 AU scan radius on stations, that means that you no longer can hide your station. It loses its strategic and tactical value. You've lost that advantage of your station. Right, and last but not least, no overlays. Right, no overlays of structures or okay, wait, no. 5,000 kilometers away, 1 per player. Oh, okay, only 8 structures per system. I was just missing one of these on the list. I didn't read it out. Only 8 structures per system. Now, I will go all of them in their pros and cons and the reasons for it. So, 5,000 kilometer distance between stations. Why did they do this? Well, number 1, Corp stations aren't really powerful on their own. They require fleets to defend them. Right? So you require large numbers to defend a station if it isn't paired with another station. But when you pair multiple stations together, they become unbelievably tough. And when I say unbelievably tough, I mean if you pair 2 together, you now need more than 20 players to take on the stations. Because more than 20 will be able to evade their catch and destruction capabilities. And there will be big ships, not small ships, by the way. You'd have to play with the long distance attack. You'd have to hit the stations just outside of the range of their weapons. So you're going to use things like tracking computers and weapon accelerators to do your 2000 DPS each and every turn that you have available to hit the station. The next major hit on the station will be when they are paired together in larges greater than 2. It makes that factor even more difficult. If you're going to play the long range battle and you're going to play the time battle, it means that you have to disable all 3 stations to destroy one station. Now, if you are smart about how you place your station, you can aim all docks towards each other. So the warp-in point is right at the central point where all the stations are close together. And the more stations you have, the worse it becomes, because if they jump to 100, they're within range of one of the stations, they're going to take a few hits. If they jump to 200, they're in the same radius, they're going to take damage from one of the stations. And this was one of the things that players were starting to learn about the stations when they implemented the 5,000 kilometer radius lockout. Now, moving on from that there, why did they do it? Well, here are the technical reasons to it in pros and cons. When the stations gather together, when they pass numbers of 3 and 4, you require large fleets. You require plus 500 to just take on the station. And if the enemy should pull up 200 members to defend the station becomes even more tough to hit. Because if the station starts catching players with less speed on them, it means that they take more damage. And that means you can destroy big ships a lot faster with the station. So it becomes a massive technical issue when it comes to those forces. So those forces have to multiply in size by 3 and 4 times. And once you go 3 times larger, it's greater than the number of players a sector can hold, and it makes it impossible for them to fight the station without heavy losses. So to destroy the station, you have to lose billions worth of ships. And you understand it's a technical fight, it takes too long, and it means that it's very difficult to progress into the enemy territory. So let's move on from that there with the next point on this here. When it came to the overlays, if you overlaid enough stations close enough to each other and you hit an opponent, this is the 5,000 kilometers that I'm talking about, nothing else. It gave you the advantage of being able to destroy opponents really, really fast. It allowed you to drop it on a gate and force enemies to have to fight stations and destroy stations before they could attack the main force. And it also meant they had to worry about the main force using the stations as a strategic hold to stop them from advancing into the sector. And it always was a big blockade option if you were smart enough to have deployed them. So yes, there was the reasons why people would have actually deployed stations that close to a gate and held them in that formation. Now moving on from point 1, let's talk about point 2. Point 2 on the Capsulia outposts and the station, the con to it. When they did, the pros to it for NetEase lost a large portion of their player base. And allowing the player base to feel the loss that they had suffered was too dangerous. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, if they have to go and make these stations allowable to put 5 of them in one spot to block a gate, you need thousands of players to breach that point. And when you go and you work out the cost factor to thousands of players, all of a sudden this is going to become a heavy hit. If someone tries to put on 100,000 plex on the market for sale, or entire core puts on that much to try and make money, and they can't make money in a day or two, they're going to figure that the game is dead. So to ensure that players didn't realize how badly the game had drained, they ensured that this wasn't an option for defense capabilities. The next reason to it is they didn't want players to gather in such large numbers because they didn't want to invest in securing the servers to hold off against large lag. That's because it will take 2 or 3 sectors worth of holding to be able to engage in this fight. And if the enemy who has the station should rally a force the same size, it will take 8 to 10 sectors worth of holding on the server. And they didn't want to have to invest more into the game because they were losing too many players. The game value had decreased too much. So obviously all the negatives put in one, those were all the cons to NetEase. And the pros to the player base was it was great content. It was a massive advantage to have the player base play when it comes to moving around in smaller numbers. So that is the pro to the player base. Obviously, the large fleet scales would have been a lot more fun had it been still available, because that would show you exactly what you are playing against. And it will mean that you'd have to have real corps instead of skeletal corps using numbers on servers to show their followers. Okay, moving up to the next point. The next point on this here was uh, one per player. Now, the Capsulia outposts are capable of developing a lot of industry for a player. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you take a Capsulia outpost and you drop it in a sector which has a high spawn rate of condensed belts, or it's a very rich mining spot and you don't have a station close enough, when you drop it in that sector, it means that station is going to get an influx of minerals and resources going through. That means you're going to have more players willing to use your station. That means you can charge players in terms of plasmoids, help them. They can help you by fueling your station. So they're going to give you millions of plasmoids. You don't have to fuel the station anymore. It means that you get the free spot basically. It covers the cost that you put into developing the station. All of this comes out of that factor. And one per player means that one player can't capitalize on that market. He can't go and own 8 sectors worth of Capsulia outposts and have everybody run in and out of them, making massive ISK flow through that one player's account. So they don't want wealthy players, right? The reason why they don't want wealthy players again is it gives too much of a feel to the game. When one player gets too wealthy and another player can't do it because they're being overwhelmed, it says that the game isn't in balance, right? But if all players could get wealthy because, say, for example, the numbers aren't in the millions in the game, so that every player could earn billions a week or billions a day, it makes it really, really difficult for NetEase to explain why the market isn't moving the way it should, why things aren't getting more and more expensive, why things are inflating and deflating uncontrollably. And it would put too much of pressure on NetEase to explain that the game was dying. So to hide that factor once again, their pro is to hide the factor, we will limit the number of stations a player can have to restrict the flow of income. There you go. Plain, simple, easy explanation on it. The pro to players, it means that more players can develop stations, more players can own a station for themselves, because players can't own multiple on their own. So everybody is going to have to get into the mood of building a station and deploying it at some point. Right. So those were the first two, 5,000 and 1 per player. The next one, 3 AU of any object. Now, the thing with 3 AU of a planetary body is, in the past, players used to deploy stations in really remote regions of space. They'll kill a dead space that's 5 AU or 8 AU out from any other body in the system, making it impossible to detect unless you get so lucky with another anomaly spawning in that odd point. So yes, that is one of the reasons why they removed it, because without that ability of a player coming in to rat and do a whole lot of business in that system, they don't stand a chance of finding your hidden station. And it meant it was a lot of work for the enemy to find stations, which meant there was less fights, and less fights would make players feel that there's less people in the game. So you get it once more, to cover up the fact that they have a failed game, they made it more easy for players to detect stations, giving a 5 AU detection radius and a 3 AU deployment radius means that it's always detectable. So obviously that's what NetEase was aiming for. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3 to point that out. That is one of the reasons why they did exactly what they did. So moving on from this point, let's move up to the next major issue in the game. And the next major issue which would come with all of this will be 3 AU, 8 stations per sector. Now, with the following packages that are coming with sovereignty, there's still the modules for the stations. Now, when I say the modules, I mean the external modules. The external modules enhance the ability of the station. They improve the sector, increase the spawn of dead spaces, increase the spawn of inquisitors. You get it. So they are really good for improving sectors. They're also good for industry. They're also good for condensed belts. They can bring a value of about 20 billion to a sector, and this is in no small way to small fleets. This would require fleets of about, it will make a sector require about 100 players, right? 100 players to pull out 20 billion an hour. That means about 200 million to a player an hour. Not really the most wealthy thing to do, but yes, that is the capability. That is the minimum figure. The maximum figure is much higher. Um, the reality to it is it isn't even 200 million to a player. It's something closer to billions to a player. If you work at it at 5 hours or 4 hours a day, you could earn in the billions depending on how long you spend in that sector. That's what you can pull out of it if you use it correctly. So yes, those are the pros to uh, the stations being larger in number when they more than 8, because you could overwhelm that sector, and instead of there being just a 20 billion possibility, your possibilities become immeasurable. Let's say, for example, there were 20 stations deployed by players, and you pulled up your dead spaces to such a high rate that they had a higher level of spawn than your small, medium, and large. They were 100% spawn rates. So yes, then it would make a massive advantage to the player base. Those figures could go through the roof. Every time you destroy a dead space, there's another dead space. And instead of it being hundreds of millions, it will be tens of billions coming out of that sector every hour. And you understand that there's just with 100 players in there, and the figures that players could pull out of the game once more become too large, once more affecting the ability to hide the fact that the game was failing. But with it comes the ability for players to influx into the game because of the ease of the game and a quality of life update, which NetEase isn't thinking about. They're more worried about people feeling the loss of players and quitting the game all of a sudden. They worry that they're going to lose the vast majority of players, right? So those are the reasons why they've hid so many things. Collidable objects and hidden stations, right? So one of the other restrictions, I don't know whether I mentioned it before, was you can't place structures in collidable objects like inside a planet or inside the sun. Now, there was a simple reason to it. When you deploy these structures inside planets or objects, you can't detect them visually. You have to approach and then you have to fight blind because you can't see your enemy force. And when you warp in, things aren't as clear as 1, 2, 3. You have these massive lists on the side. You have to look through lists. You have to use overviews. And if the enemy is smart enough, they can just use the stations with 1 or 2 players playing the right name. And instead of being able to attack them by distance, you get webbed and the stations take you out, or the station takes you out. So that is one of the reasons why they removed it. This is the only one where I'm not going to criticize NetEase. They improve the ability of you not suffering from lag issues. They also improve the ability of you not suffering from being overwhelmed by number. Not being overwhelmed by number. So they made that a real simple mechanic. And in the future, we're going to see a lot more corp stations destroyed, a lot more citadels taken down. And that's because things have become very advanced in terms of tactic. And numbers in the game aren't as large as they once were. It took 4 corporations put together to destroy the first citadel. And that is a massive force. Just to be honest, when figures go like that there and you get sectors with 900 players right now, it is really rare. And considering that I am saying that it is rare, you should understand that this isn't an everyday thing. I hope that you all do enjoy this pros and cons video. And yes, I did lay it on thick against NetEase. NetEase is trying to hide the loss of players. That's how come they are making things so difficult. And it's costing them players as well, which is where the pro and con comes into it. They want people to feel like this game is growing and they need you to stick on this game till they find something that can actually pull players in. Like they have an arena mode coming in in the future possibly. And with the arena mode means PvP, 1v1, 5v5, 10v10, fleet versus fleet, squad versus squad. It becomes simple fights. It becomes strategic fights. It becomes real PvP instead of gank mechanic PvP. Gank mechanic PvP, as I said, isn't really a good fight because it's one against many, and when you oppose them, it's always overwhelm, outnumber, outgun. And in PvP, in real PvP, it's ship versus ship, class versus class. Right? It could even be weapon versus weapon. You can limit them in such ways that that becomes what you're going to have, and you can give players prestige. Now that is all the way down at the end of the year, closer to when we're going to have black holes, which will transport us to other parts of the galaxy in dead space. Now that isn't a dead space anomaly. Dead space is another section of the space which doesn't show up on the map. It is totally blank, and it means it's a little bit more difficult to handle. In those sectors, PvP is pure gank. There is no way to detect when enemies are near, and there's no way for you to know when enemy is in a sector besides going in and looking at them directly, face to face. So you have to hunt, and you have to risk getting destroyed. So yes, those are all of the things that you have to know about Dead Space. And within Dead Space, you're going to get people deploying corp stations and citadels, and everything will be deployed there. And I'm expecting more buildings. This isn't enough for Sovereignty, to be honest. And we will be seeing more things coming out with Sovereignty. Hopefully they deploy a third station type module that can actually fight on its own to give players that nice edge when it comes to combat. And the 5,000 kilometer non-collision story is to make sure that players can't block up sectors and have heavy defensive patterns. So yes, all of that put together will make a lot more fun in the future. I hope that those things do come out. Plus there is the possibility of capital ships coming out in the future. That is another level above the battleship, which is going to take the game up a whole other level, and that might cause an influx of players for a short period. So I hope that you all do enjoy. See you all in the next one.